Welcome. Our lead story, the New York Times Second Life. Its weekday circulation is up 73% in 6 months as the paper of record finally figured out how to stream itself to the next generation. Also today, are we on the cusp of an internet gambling explosion where any game could be fair game? This, plus the City University, lights the way to urban solar power, and a photographer shows us a personal side of Africa that you won't see on the front page. First, the newspaper business. Maybe it's not on its deathbed after all. The latest numbers reveal small gains in circulation for papers across the country, but huge gains at the New York Times. How come? Edmund Lee, media reporter for Bloomberg News, is here to put the numbers in perspective. Welcome to the show. Thank you for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
So the Times put up this paywall recently, meaning more people will have to pay to see more Times articles on their website. I would have thought that might mean more revenue for the Times, but fewer people seeing their content. Didn't work out that way?
Didn't work out that way. They saw, as you said, 70% bump in circulation. Now, that's got a lot of people questioning it. Did they really have 70% more readers? It's partly have to do with the way that the Audit Bureau, which counts circulation, they've sort of relaxed their rules about how you count digital subscribers. And so there's more interpretation as to how that can happen. And what ended up happening is that in the case of the New York Times, they launched the paywall about a year ago, a little over a year ago. So they've had about a year to really see full-fledged numbers. And the way that the ABC counts people online, you as a Times subscriber could be counted even as much as 3 times in a single day. If, say, in the case with the way that I do it, if you have a digital subscription, you might see it on your smartphone on the way to work. You get to into work, you might check it on the website. That's 2 all of a sudden. Go back home, you might catch up with it on your tablet computer at home. That's 3. So even though you're paying for it, you could be counted as many as 3 times
in terms of circulation. So you're one subscriber, paying 1 fee, but you're counted as 3 people for circulation if you're seeing the iPad app, the website, and maybe the print edition.
Right. So in some cases, however, the finer point is that it might actually be accurate. In the case of me and my wife, we have a print subscription, a daily print subscription, which gives us access online. So we sort of split the paper, or she takes the print paper, and I'll read it on my iPhone on the way to work. So even though we're only paying for 1 subscription, there are 2 of us. So in that sense, it is accurate. I think in a lot of cases, however, there are people who pay online who are accessing it multiple devices on a single day, and so they're counted twice. And I think that's what that 70% is really reflective of.
Now, this paywall, it was originally, correct me if I'm wrong, after 10 free articles online.
It was actually 20.
20.
That was the limit they originally set. You have 20 free articles every month, and then they'll prompt you to pay.
Per article.
As soon as you read your 21st article, the wall will come up and say, hey, so you've hit your limit. Please, here's how much. There's a few tiers of access you can pay into, but that's when they would start prompting you to pay to go into it. Of course, sophisticated internet users might clear their browser, or their cookies or something, and go right back and continue reading for free. And they're aware of that, certainly, but I think it as a deterrent to get people to pay. I think clearly it worked in some ways.
And there are some exceptions to that, like if you get shared a New York Times article through social media, Facebook or Twitter or something, and you click through, does that not count toward the paywall limit?
Right, so that doesn't count. What they actually did, that's what they call side door sites or side door access. They wanted to maintain the marketing, the viral nature of the internet, and a lot of times New York Times articles are shared through Facebook or Twitter. They didn't want to limit that. So they actually did lower that 20 limit to 10 as of a few months ago, about a year after the paywall launched. So they are trying to spur more people into subscriptions now that they see that it's been working pretty well.
So if the Times jumped by these measures 73% in circulation in the last 6 months, are they doing something so different from other papers? Because in general, a lot of papers around the country and some others in the city saw a bit of an increase, but nothing approaching 73%.
Right, that's true. I think they are unusual in the sense that it was a sort of a perfect storm of timing. The Audit Bureau relaxed its accounting rules or changed them, altered them last year or a little over a year ago. That's when the Times instituted their paywall. They're the only major newspaper out there that created a brand new paywall out of nothing in the past year and a half. So I think that's what you're seeing in terms of those numbers. The actual paywall model itself that the Times is following is closer to the Financial Times, which they started a paywall about, say, a little before then, where they allow a few free articles and then at a certain point you pay into it. And that the other end of the spectrum, you would have the Wall Street Journal, which they've always been a paid-for online site since its very beginning. So you had those two examples, those two models that the Times could follow. They went closer to the Financial Times model.
So the Wall Street Journal, even though I think it has more readers on a daily basis of the print edition, correct?
The Wall Street Journal is still the highest circulating paper. They've got over 2 million on average per day. I think the Times is closer to 1.5 at this point, even with the new circulation bump. So the Wall Street Journal is still the largest.
But because you already had to pay for the Wall Street Journal online, we didn't see a big increase in the last year.
Right, exactly.
The Times jump is new, perhaps because the paywall and therefore that potential for triple counting is new.
Exactly right. But at the same time, the Journal could have taken advantage of those same ABC rules. So the fact that a lot of people who read the Journal probably still access it similarly to the way that digital subscribers access the New York Times, whether their iPhone or their iPad, or as well as their website at work. So, but we're used to counting it the old way in terms of actual people paying to go online. So their count is actually truer, but I think it just would seem a little bit disingenuous at this point to all of a sudden say, now we're seeing a huge bump in online subscribers.
So big picture, are we ironically seeing the physical newspaper, the printed paper, circulation increasing because they're charging more for articles that you read online?
It's a good question. I don't really have the answer to that, unfortunately. I think it's something that the Times company itself is also looking at. Just they're trying to find the right formula in terms of how much can we increase online subscriptions, either that in a way that improves print circulation or maybe even hurts it a little bit. So long as we come out on top at the end, it's okay. And I think they're still tinkering with that.
But the death of the newspaper in general is being postponed by these various papers, new models for charging?
Definitely. I think it's certainly helping them. I think it's sort of a new lease on life, I guess, so to speak, in terms of how it's helping newspapers financially. I think, as I said, the model is still being adjusted, so we'll have to see in the next 6 months to a year if it continues to sustain that or not.
All right, at least there is still news and a way to pay people to gather news. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Coming up, CUNY's push to put solar panels on New York's 1 million rooftops.
Did you know CUNY leads the way for students with disabilities?
CUNY Leads means linking employment, academics, and disability services. If you're a CUNY student with a visible or invisible disability, the City University of New York offers eligible students free career development and placement services. To find out if you qualify, visit cuny.edu/CUNYLeads. CUNY Leads, to the career I always wanted.
Mom, I'm not gonna go to college.
What are you saying? You've got to go to college.
Well, they offered me a job and...
Son, college is much more important.
No.
Yes.
No, Mom.
Yes.
Anyways, it's my decision.
Okay, well then decide what degree you're going to get because you will go to college.
Their tomorrow depends on your words today. The Hispanic Scholarship Fund has the information you need to help your kids go to college.
Along with weight loss, it's one of the many ways to fight osteoarthritis pain. For more information on managing pain, go to fightarthritispain.org.
Air conditioning season is just around the corner, and with it comes the threat of blackouts. But it also brings sun, and lots of it. And New York has 1 million rooftops. 2/3 of them could potentially host solar panels. In fact, a major push is going on right now to harness more of New York City's sunlight. One of the central players in that effort happens to be the institution that produces this program, CUNY. Another is Con Edison. Here to enlighten us about solar energy in NYC is Tria Case. She's the University Director of Sustainability for CUNY. And with us as well, John Mucci, Vice President of Manhattan Electric Operations at Con Ed. Welcome, both of you. Thank you for doing this. Tria, what percentage of New York City's electricity comes from solar now?
Oh, a very small percentage of our electricity comes from solar now, but it's growing. And so we've been setting various targets and trying to let folks know what's possible in New York City. And we've, as you mentioned, recognized that a good percentage of our 1 million buildings could host solar. So now we're trying to understand how to make that happen and make it happen more easily.
Do you have some numbers on that at Con Ed?
Yeah, I think right now we're about 13 megawatts in our Con Ed territory. You know, a couple of years ago it was only 4 megawatts. So 13 megawatts can power a small city, but it is a significant amount for technology that doesn't burn fuel. And it's a small percentage of the overall consumption in New York City, which is about 13,000 at its peak, 13,000 megawatts. But it's been growing pretty rapidly, and it makes a lot of sense to do, and it helps us quite a bit with reducing our carbon footprint.
We are showing a map, and I wonder if you would tell us what this is. This is your map at CUNY, right?
Absolutely. So just to follow on what John was saying, in 2007 we had about a megawatt of solar in the city. So we've grown more than 800% in New York City in the amount of solar that's been installed. And what you're looking at here is actually all of the solar installations throughout New York City. So if you were on a computer and you were to click on any one of those little circles, you would learn a little bit about each one of those solar installations, how big it is, what it's producing.
What do the different colors mean?
Some of them are systems that have data acquisition systems associated with them, so you can actually get real-time information about how much solar is being produced on them. Some of them are solar thermal systems, so they're actually solar hot water systems, and some of them are solar electric systems where they're actually producing power.
So now let's look up some of these individual sites, as you say we can do. I think we're about to see, well, let's see, I'm not sure what we're about to see.
Well, what you're looking at now is the screen that allows you to plug in a specific address so that you can see how much solar is possible on that rooftop. And so someone has now clicked on a rooftop, and you can see how much solar potential there is on that rooftop.
And I'm told this is the El Dorado Coffee Roasters building in Flushing.
Ah, okay.
Familiar with it?
Sure. And what's exciting about this map, as opposed to many other solar maps that exist around the country, is that we were able to take LiDAR data of New York City. If you will, we have 15 billion points of data of the New York City, and we are now able to kind of create a 3D map of the city so that we understand where the shadowing might take place from one building to a next, down to the granularity of a coffee cup. So when you plug in your rooftop, you really are seeing truly what is possible on that rooftop, including taking into consideration shadowing.
How much exposure to actual sunlight.
Exactly.
How much of the day. Does Con Ed care about this one way or the other? You know, a lot of skeptics will say, oh, Con Ed and the other power companies will make sure that this never happens, solar energy on a wide-scale basis, because they can't meter it.
Well, it's metered. It's metered because it's net metered, but it certainly is something we encourage. Con Edison has always been involved with energy efficiency projects and projects like these for a long, long time. We were saving a lot back when it was when nobody else thought that was a good idea, and I think we've been ahead of our time in that area. The Con Edison is a little different in New York, because in New York State the power generation is really a competitive industry. We've sold off our plants, and they became a part of a competitive initiative that the state did a number of years back. And so we buy our energy from these other independent power producers. So Con Ed at this
point is just a distribution system?
Basically, we are
and
pipes and wires.
So you buy nuclear power from Entergy and Indian Point, and you buy coal produced power from somebody else and solar energy from somebody else?
Yeah, we actually buy it from a New York State power pool, the New York State Independent System Operator, which is the sort of controls the market. And we buy that power and we pass it on to our customers. And it's the same cost we pay for it is what we pass on to the customer. The way Con Edison sets its rates is based on the investment we make in the distribution system.
Let's show another slide, and this is the Whitehall Ferry Terminal, Staten Island Ferry Terminal on the Manhattan side. And what are we looking at here, Tria? Is this the bottom side of some solar panels facing the sun?
Right. We're looking at the back, sort of at the back side of the solar panels, and can see how they're actually mounted.
Whose are they?
Well, those belong to the city, right? So
okay.
It's a Whitehall terminal. So so those are contributing to offset the cost of power on that particular site. One of the things that's important to note about solar for New York City is that it's a great producer of power during our peak demand times. You started out talking about air conditioning and so on. You know, solar panels are producing at their best when the sun is out and when we're actually using the most of our power. And so one of the reasons why we've been working so closely with Con Ed is because we recognize that solar can be a great contributor to reducing our peak load when we're really constraining our grid.
And I mentioned the million rooftops. Do you have a goal of getting X number of rooftops citywide, hooked up for solar in X amount of time?
Well, we had set a goal of 8.1 megawatts by 2015 back 2 years ago when we were working with the Department of Energy in making New York City one of the first 13 Solar America cities, and we beat it early, and by a few megawatts. So we're very excited about that. And so now we're starting to look at not just creating some targets, but how can we actually just simply make it easier to get through the permitting process to adopt solar, and how can we make sure that the incentive structures and the tax structures are such that solar can be competitive.
Right. Is there, are there obstacles, particular obstacles to expanding solar power in New York City that are different from other places?
Yeah, there is. You know, we have a very reliable system. We have underground grids that are all connected among each other. So generally, the power comes from power plants through our substations and goes to the customer. We're really not designed as well to come the other way. And so we over the years, have looked at different ways to modify our system to allow that. At some point, we'll have to make some technical modifications to our system to allow large amounts of that. Right now, the numbers are small enough that we can do it within the boundaries of our design as it is. But the New York electric grids were really not designed to have large amounts of power flowing in the other direction. But it's technically achievable. Yeah.
And the CUNY map shows what kinds of buildings have what kinds of potential?
Well, what it shows is that 2/3 of our buildings have some solar potential, and so it allows for any building owner to be able to, as we said, plug in their address and understand truly what their potential is, but more importantly, possibly what the payback is on that investment. What you didn't see on there is actually a financial calculator that allows you to see what the payback on that investment would be based on your cost of power and the size of that installation.
Would you say that individual homeowners can get into this, or is the cost up front so high that it would take many years to start seeing a savings in your home energy bill?
It's absolutely for consumers on the residential side and on the commercial side, and also on the government municipal side, as you saw. The payback is such that you start to see 5-6 year returns based on the current incentive structure. So,
and this is a policy debate too, really, right? Because in New Jersey, for example, they have a large subsidy for homeowners and businesses that convert to solar because it was seen as in the state's interest. Christie is trying to roll that back because he's not as convinced as previous administrations that this really is in the state's interest, as opposed to other ways of developing power for New Jersey. We don't have that level of subsidy in New York, but are we having a similar debate?
Well, I guess there is a debate about that. I think there is a pretty good subsidy right now, and we want to see those subsidies work. We have a lot of programs just going into place right now. NYSERDA has put out a number of requests for proposals, and we'll be seeing a large amount of money coming downstate that used to go just to the upstate area that our customers pay, and we see that now coming downstate to these projects that'll be down in the New York area. And that'll give us a tremendous jump in the number of solar installations we have today. So we're expecting that to grow. So we don't see the need for even more right this minute, but at some point you may want to relook at that.
So let's go back to that El Dorado Coffee Roasters building in Flushing. We saw it on the map earlier. Here is an actual photograph, and boy, does it look like it has solar panels, Tria.
It sure does, and you can see that what they've done is to design it around the various things that are on the roof. So you set back from your AC units and from the edge of the roof, and design it accordingly. That's why it has a sort of a funny shape.
If we saw a lot of these cropping up around the city, would it mean an improvement in New York City's air quality, or isn't it localized like that?
Sure, I could answer that. I think just the installations we have so far has reduced our carbon footprint in New York City by about 7,500 tons a year. So you are reducing carbon footprint.
And the carbon footprint is toward global warming or reduction in global warming.
Exactly.
And what about the breathability of the air, which is a different kind of pollution?
Well, the good thing about solar is it peaks right at the hottest part of the day. And in the peak, when we have a summer peak, we're using a lot of machines that are less efficient. Not our machines, but these independent machines, right? So they're coming on to online. They're less efficient machines. They only run for a few hours a year, but they're run at the peak. To the degree we could reduce that, would be significantly less bang for your buck. There'd be more bang for your buck to get less carbon emissions and less overall emissions in general.
Right. And what kinds of, among the incentives, there's something called solar empowerment zones.
Yes.
Tell us about those.
So sort of, building upon what John was just saying, those solar empowerment zones are the areas of the city where we have daytime peaking. So coincidentally, it's also where solar can also be producing to offset that daytime grid load. So we've worked with Con Edison to locate those zones of the city where we have a nice coincidence of rooftop capacity for solar and daytime peaking. And those we've designated as solar empowerment zones.
And New York is officially a Solar America city. What does that mean?
Well, we're one of 25 cities in the United States who has put together a roadmap and a plan on how to grow solar energy installations in the city. And there's many cities that have gone on and expanded their solar portfolio by doing that. And we're one of the 25 that have produced that kind of a plan.
Now here I think we're looking at an apartment building in Long Island City full of, now we're on to the Gateway project in Brooklyn. Do you know about Gateway?
Sure, yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what we're seeing here.
I don't know enough about who put that in or the size of it.
Does it mean, though, when we look at this photo and the one of the Coffee Roasters building previously, does it mean that architecture needs to move toward more flat roofs and less pitched roofs in order to accommodate solar, or not really?
Absolutely not. I mean, you can put solar on the side of a building. You can put it on a pitched roof, on a flat roof. It's just a different mounting process. So it doesn't mean we have to change our architecture in terms of that sense, but we certainly want to think about where we place things on our roofs so that we make it easier to put solar on them. And
the angles don't make it more efficient or less efficient?
Certain angles will be more or less efficient depending on where you are in the country, but the technology is changing now. So there's articulating solar panels. There's also the thin film panels. People can actually put it on the sides of the building in some cases. So the technology is becoming such that there's more and more opportunity to use these things, and there'll be less dollars per megawatt, to get them on.
So what are we after here, really? Air quality, carbon footprint, energy independence, money savings. What are we really after if we're going to say, oh, gosh, we really want to convert to as much solar energy as possible?
I think you just hit on the key areas that we would want to focus on. And I think for New York City, we have a special focus in that, we do have to produce a certain percentage of our power from within our city limits during those peak times. And those peak times are the times when solar is producing at its best. So it's a great technology for New York City, and for New York City to be able to have this nice coincidence of being able to reduce grid constraint, but also it's an economic development initiative. Somebody has to be up on that roof, putting those solar panels up on the roof. And
CUNY itself, are you trying to be a model for other large institutions by putting a lot of panels up on a lot of CUNY buildings, which are all over the city?
Well, actually, two things. One is we've been training solar installers, so we, I think we've trained a good percentage of the folks who are up on those roofs throughout the city. And then also we are putting solar on a few of our campuses, and also in partnership with Con Ed, looking at how and when solar is best used for reducing load on the grid, or reducing load in the building, or powering a battery so that we have it to grab later. So we're starting to look at at the ways that we can help think in a smart way about the power as well.
Yeah, some of these empowerment zones have the ability to reduce the amount of investment we'll have to make in the future. In other words, as more and more people in those zones use solar panels, we'll have to put less copper in the ground, less wires, less expense that overall our customers would have to pay for.
And that's sort of the holy grail, isn't it? Getting solar to be kind of market-based, sustainable in the marketplace without taxpayer subsidies?
Exactly right. No, there's no technology that could last forever without with subsidies. It has to be economically viable by itself, and we see it getting to that point at some point.
All right. Well, there you go, folks. More solar energy in New York City than you might have thought. Not only in Arizona, New Mexico, and California, and places like that. Thank you so much for telling us about this. And coming up after a break, the coming explosion in online gambling. Farmville with real coins.
Traditional light bulbs actually generate 9 times more heat than light. Switch to Energy Star light bulbs, and you'll realize just how much cash you are really burning through. Saving energy saves you money. Learn more at EnergySavers.gov.
So are you addicted to social games like Farmville that you can play on your smartphone? At least there's no money at stake, right? Well, that's likely to change. We're on the cusp of an explosion in online gambling, apparently, thanks to a recent Justice Department ruling. Our next guest has been researching the future of internet gambling. Rebecca Bolin is a fellow at the Information Society Project at the Yale University Law School. She joins us via Skype from Houston. Thank you very much for coming on. Hello from New York.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
So that sweet game, Farmville, is about to become a casino?
Well, there's a few more steps involved, but there's no obstacle now.
Well, how would that happen?
So now that the Justice Department has removed federal obligations, now the states are free to legislate or regulate how they choose to do so. And I think it's clear that gambling will be on the upswing in the next few years.
What did the Justice Department regulate and what did they just change?
So for the last 25 years, Department of Justice has found that the federal regulations trump the state obligations. So even Nevada or the Virgin Islands wanting to enter into online gambling within their own states wouldn't have been allowed by the Justice Department's interpretation of 60s rules. So now with that new interpretation, the federal restrictions are gone and states are free to do what they wish as long as they don't interfere with sports gambling.
What were the old rules?
So, well, the law hasn't changed. The Wire Act is a Kennedy-era law. It's still on the books. The question is the interpretation, which has now changed. And courts have interpreted the law a different way, but I think it's fair to say that the current memo reflects those court decisions and rules that the Wire Act only applies to sports betting, which means also horses, dogs, and sports in online gambling.
But internet sites are global. So to keep using Farmville as an example, it could be legal to bet with real coins on Farmville in New York, but not in New Jersey, something like that?
Certainly, if the states decided to legislate that, I think there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all answer, and the answer for Nevada won't be the same as the answer for Utah, and the answer for New York isn't the same as the answer for New Jersey.
And so what would that mean when these websites, as I say, are national or global?
Well, a lot of the states are struggling with what to do with this. I think that we're going to have a lot more questions than answers in the short run, but states have done this before with alcohol, with tobacco, with all kinds of issues like this, and states have regulated successfully on a state level. So I think that as we move forward, states are going to try to move forward with their gambling operations, and we might see more creativity like Farmville. There's no reason gambling has to be a dealer-based system with a deck of cards. Just because we physically have a dealer now doesn't mean that's what future gambling will be.
For whom is this a potential windfall?
So the immediate beneficiaries are going to be states that are already running online or online-enabled lotteries. So Illinois has already put on online lottery. You can buy lottery tickets online in the state of Illinois now. So it's clear that there's a few states that are going to immediately start doing that. New York is not one of them, but it could be if it chooses to enable that on the state level.
Why is sports betting an exception?
That's the statutory interpretation of that particular law. There's also another federal law that would prohibit sports betting on a state level, even if states were to allow it. That's why the federal government claims that New Jersey can't enable sports betting within Atlantic City casinos. Those laws are queued up to be challenged. It looks likely they will be challenged in the next few years. But for now, the law of the land is that sports betting is only allowed where sports betting was legal in the early 90s, which would be Delaware, Nevada, and a few other states.
So some private big gambling companies in conjunction with states might start making a lot of money here because the private firms would be setting up things that they would take a cut of, plus the state would be able to take a share of through taxes, other than with state lotteries, which are more direct?
Well, maybe. Gambling is always more complicated than that, Brian. I think it's clear that California has a very complicated bill proposed that would kind of allow opt-out of what they call the card clubs or other kinds of gambling within California. When you have a lot of interests at stake, it becomes complicated. Tribes like Mohegan's Son they have conflicted opinions where they're indifferent about internet gambling, but if there is going to be internet gambling, they want to be involved. They don't want to get left behind. And I think that's what organized gambling interests are moving forward with. They have a conflicted interest in it, but they don't want to be left behind in what's going to be the new wave of gambling.
And how does this affect Indian tribes?
Indian tribes have a different relationship than other kinds of gambling with the states and with the federal government. Federal legislation would be more evening to to Indian tribes. I think Indian tribes are going to have to be on their own dealing with states in the short run. In the long run, Congress could fix some of these problems with federal legislation. They don't seem to have a lot of incentive to do so, but they could. They could equalize tribes to talk to states in a different way. But for now, they're going to have to find their own seat at the table.
But it sounds like from this, gambling is going to be a lot easier for people to do now. Not that anybody can't find a bookie, but it sounds like you could just use your iPhone and go to a gambling site just like that, and it's going to be much easier to do than it was in the past. Would you say?
Fair enough, Brian. other places have already dealt with this. This has been legal in Canada and in Europe for a long time. There's a lot of previous experience to draw on. A lot of it involves small limits. It involves checks and balances. It might even be more secure than the previous black market or maybe gray market overseas operators we had before. I think it's fair to say that when states want to enter into an iPhone app or some kind of online gambling like that, they would be more careful than that about it, and they would at least try to enter cautiously. I think that's what we've seen Illinois do with the online lottery tickets with a $10 maximum. And maybe that isn't such a big deal. I think people will think about this, and it'll happen incrementally over time, and there will be failures. But I think that the state lottery authorities and gambling authorities have had a lot of experience with this, and there's a lot of experience overseas to draw from.
What's that $10 limit in Illinois? $10 a day, $10 a week? What is it?
It's $10 a bet, but you have to be physically in Illinois, Brian.
Right. Well, I'm not trying to run out to the Illinois.gov site and do it myself, but $10 a bet, and then you could go back a minute later and bet again, and another minute later and bet again if you're an addict.
I think it's a little more secure than that, but they do have limits on it. There is an upper limit, and in Illinois they are checking personal information. They have a lot of checks on to verify people's identities.
If the reason this is going to be loosened in terms of restrictions is because of a new interpretation of a 50-year-old federal law, might Congress just go back and change the federal law to make it harder again?
Sure, they could. We have a lot of gaming-specific laws, and then we have a lot of organized crime-specific laws, which aren't the same as gambling laws. There's only 2 laws on the books, Brian, that allow the federal government to outlaw gambling that states have allowed. And that's this law, which is the Wire Act, and then the lottery laws, which have been amended over time to allow states to do what they want to legalize. We could imagine either interpretations, that Congress would either change the laws or maybe it would go back to the old interpretation. I don't know what Congress is going to do. I think Congress could do either.
What's the state of the art in the state capitals in terms of the debate at this point? It seems to me that more and more ordinary Americans are seeing this bizarre moral disconnect where government frowns on private gambling but has commercials running constantly to encourage gambling through state lotteries.
Well, it depends on what state you're in, Brian. I think that the answer in some states isn't going to be the answer in others. Utah's already outlawed online gambling. They got it done very quickly. Other states have no real dialogue about this. My home state of Texas, I would include in that discussion. New York has discussed it, but it looks like it's not going to move forward immediately. Other states are much more seriously discussing it, like New Jersey, which looks like it's pushing a bill through by the end of this month. And I think we'll know the answer to that question within a few months on whether people of their states really want to move forward with this as more gambling.
What worries you about this, and what encourages you about this?
Well, I am glad to see this go to the states. I think people can make their own decisions, and I think people can talk to their own state legislators at their own state level about what they think is appropriate for their state. And I think we're going to see a lot of different answers to this question over time. I think it's very exciting what we're going to see in different jurisdictions and in different places. I think people are going to come up with different solutions, and maybe they won't match the European solutions either. So we'll see what's going to happen in the next few years, Brian. I don't think it's going to take 40 years like it did for state lotteries. I think internet gambling is going to move quickly, and we're going to see it very shortly.
All right, more internet gambling coming to a computer or a smartphone near you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian.
Up next, award-winning New York Times photographer Chester Higgins shows us an Africa seldom seen.
Take-out meals for just $12.99. Call now.
Sherry Pearson. You are the sole surviving heir of the King of Montanopolis, and you are now worth $45 million.
I'm rich! This can't be real.
Of course it's not real. Come on. Having money isn't about luck. Like that takeout meal. Cook at home instead, you can save thousands a year. Feed me. Feed the pig.
How many trees in the cookie jar? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life.
Go Dad! Go Dad!
Take time to be a dad today. The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today.
From the news photographs that come out of Africa, you could get the impression there is only trouble. Few people living ordinary lives, few places left of extraordinary beauty. The photographs we are about to see, however, balance the picture. They come from the camera of Chester Higgins Jr. He has been a New York Times photographer for more than 3 decades, each year taking the time to travel and bring back intimate portraits of African communities and the African diaspora. There is a mini retrospective of his work on right now, which we'll tell you about later, but first let's meet Chester Higgins. Hi, it's so great to have you on the program. I love your images.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
And let's just go right on to the first one, and then we'll talk about what we're seeing as we go. There are so many hundreds of photographs in your book, Feeling the Spirit, and this exhibit is now on at Tekserve on 23rd Street. So we're going to narrow the focus primarily to one place that you've been recently, Ethiopia. And let's start with this image. Who is this and from where exactly?
Well, I like to think that this is my Mona Lisa. It's a Surma teenager in the southern part of Ethiopia. When I go to Ethiopia, I spend 6 weeks, and 3 of them are spent camping down in the south. And I take what I call a New York City fashion studio with lights and backdrops, and I go from village to village, and I select my visual materials, and I shoot, and I ask them what they think is a fair price to pay them, and I pay them, and we get their name, and we do it like this. And this child was just incredibly beautiful, and I just loved her countenance. And I was fascinated by how she held these heavy boar horns, and then I realized it's a strap that goes over her head. It's not something that comes out of her ears.
Let's go on to the next image. This is a couple in front of their hut.
In front of the hut that's made out of papyrus. And these people are the Abori people, also Southerners, the southern part of Ethiopia. And you notice the man is holding, all the men seem to carry these stools that are also their pillows that they sleep with at night. They keep insects from getting into their ears and the sand from getting on their hair. But during the daytime, they become their stools, and they all carry them.
Now, we'll show some more images in a minute. Tell me again, you said you pay your subjects to have their photographs taken? Because in typical photojournalism, typical New York Times policy, I would imagine, you cannot pay news subjects.
Well, 2 things. This is on my vacation.
This is on your
my personal
day job is working for the Times. This is something you do on your own.
This is something I do on my own, and I'm not doing a story. This is something that I'm doing for myself, to discover for myself, essentially, the many different aspects of the African self that I'm not aware of. And I kind of think that it's only fair to pay them. So I budget a shooting fee. It's generally not that much. I mean, I ask people what they think is fair, and it's usually from $5 to $25. So that determines, if I get a more expensive village, it determines I have to shoot less. If I get a more inexpensive village, then I can shoot more. But the important thing, though, is that people have a chance to feel that that what they're doing is worth something.
Yes.
And I'm not coming to take, but I'm coming to also. I want to create a balance here. I'm giving as well.
And they feel that they're not exploited that way.
Absolutely.
Let's look at the next image. Tell us what we're seeing.
Here we're looking at a volcanic lake. Ethiopia has a lot of volcanoes. And this is a lake, and this huge sycamore tree has become a very sacred spot for the people who believe in nature. That if you read most religious beginnings, they all believe that the external world, the natural world, is a function of one great creator. And these people who feel this way, they have these gatherings at this tree, well, every day. But once a year, I went there last year, and it was 3 million people who came to this annual event, where they make a circle around this tree. They adorn the tree with butter, and they make little smoke fires at the bottom of it, and they think this is a very holy place for them.
And I love the images of the circles in this. You have a circle of people around the tree, around the smaller circle of the trunk of the tree, and the circle of the lake.
Thank you, they're echoing.
They are visually echoing each other. And we're going to go right to another image.
Now this is, Ethiopia has this incredible history. Most people don't realize it. But they have, back in the 13th century, they started to build what they call their own New Jerusalem. And in a town, in a mountain range, they went to the mountains, different mountains. There's 11 of these churches. And they drew out a footprint of what the church should look like. And then they separated the church by going down 40 feet from the top, 100 feet around. So what was left was this monolithic piece of rock that was separated from the mountain, and then they went back to that rock.
A church carved out of rock.
Carved out of rock. I mean, so you would have to call it divine sculpture, in a way. It's quite beautiful. And today, up until this day, they still use, these churches are still used by the people.
So that's what's in the bottom of the image. It's a rock church in the shape of a cross, if I'm seeing it right.
Right, because they're Orthodox people. So this is the Orthodox cross, equilateral cross. And in the church, in the pit, and then at 4 o'clock in the morning, this is what the stars will look like, because you're about 6,000 feet above sea level.
I don't think I have ever seen a starrier night. When I saw this image for the first time earlier today, it really took my breath away that there could be any place on Earth where you can see that many stars.
Well, you know, one of the things I find attractive about the Ethiopia nighttime sky is that because of the stars being so close to you, in one feeling, you feel that you can reach up and touch them. And I sort of think, I like to call it, you're looking at the floor of heaven.
How do you work? Do you arrive in a village already knowing what you want to shoot?
Well, yes and no. I know I want to deal with people, but I don't know what the spirit is offering me, so to speak. So so the creativity has to be forefront, that I'm completely ready to pivot, ready to move based upon what's in front of me. And what's in front of me beckons me. And I follow those beckons, and that's what leads me.
How did you find this guy, and what are we really looking at on his face?
Well, these people, the Karo, have a very interesting tradition. In the morning when they bathe, and they make paint from the rocks. And they paint themselves in different configurations as their daily message to the spirit. And this is at the Omo region in Ethiopia. It's a region that maybe in about 5 years will be flooded over because of one of the new dams. But these people, I went and I did the same thing I do. I go to a village, I get the elders together. So the men will sit around the circle, the women will stand, and I say, you know, that I'm here. I'd love to make photographs to show people back home who have no idea what you look like or that you exist, to show them pictures of you. And how much would you charge? And can I then select people? And then looking around for the people who I think would make great visual statements, like this young man here. I pick him out and I work with him.
And what about these girls?
Oh, these girls, I call the flashlight girls. These girls are in Mali. And this is one of the pictures used on a postcard that Tekserve produced. And the reason I call them flashlight girls, this is on a market day, and you see my backdrop and my lighting. But I noticed that all of the young women and the older women carried flashlights in the daytime. But I then discovered, my wife discovered, that they had no batteries. And then she discovered that what they were used for were pocketbooks. That this is where they carried their money.
In the flashlights?
In the flashlights.
Where'd the flashlights come from?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure. They were imported, but I know that the shoes they're wearing are Chinese. There are a lot of Chinese products flooded in.
All right, now, surprise image.
Are
we in Brooklyn?
We're on the tallest mountain outside of Addis Ababa called in Toto. And these are Ethiopian Jews who have this very unique ceremony called Sig. And Sig is made to commemorate the time that Moses went up to Sinai and received the tablets. So they make this procession up to the tallest mountain, and then the rabbi, they have their service there and they go back. Now, it was my earlier trip in Ethiopia in '74 that I found out about Ethiopian Jews. And then coming back, I was doing some research at the Schomburg, and I saw pictures of an old picture of Ethiopian Jews in Harlem, which really made me very curious. So I started asking around, and I started locating the African American Jews who are in Harlem, who are in Brooklyn, the Bronx, what have you. But it was because of discovering them in Ethiopia that I found them here.
Now we are in New York, correct?
We are in New York in Harlem, and we're having, this is at a synagogue in Harlem called Commandment Keepers. And on the left, we have an Ethiopian, Rabbi Paris, and on the inside, we have Rabbi White at this wedding under the huppah at the Commandment Keepers congregation up in Harlem.
And we have another one from New York City?
Yes. Now here you have Rabbi Paris is in the middle, and this is a synagogue out in Brooklyn. And with, you see they have several Torahs.
So Ethiopian Jews around New York.
Ethiopian Jews around New York. And then you have here Rabbi Paris with the group up in Harlem, up in the Bronx, Mount Hebron Synagogue with a bar mitzvah ceremony. And I think there is another one. And there are more at Tekserve. We have about 10 or 12 of them that people
And
can
that's
see.
where, tell us again, the exhibit of your work from Africa and of the diaspora all over the world.
Right. Is that which some of it's come from my book, Feeling the Spirit. Some of it is new. But the exhibition is called My Soul Flies Home to Africa, and it's at Tekserve for 6 weeks down on 23rd Street.
That's the
119 West 2/3.
Apple Store, Tekserve.
Apple Store. If you have a macro problems like I've had over the years, a lot of my friends, that's where we go.
On West 23rd Street. Now, so we saw some of your Africa shots. We saw some particular diaspora shots from here in New York.
Right.
But you also go all over the world and shoot people from the African diaspora.
Right.
So what do you take in very different places from here? What do you take in the Netherlands? What do you take somewhere else?
Well, when I go to the Netherlands, I'm looking at what I call the tertiary movement of the African diaspora. To explain, the primary movement is a continent, and the secondary movement is across the Atlantic Ocean. And then the tertiary movement usually is those colonies that go back to the mother capitals. So you have people from Suriname who will be going back to the Dutch colony, to Amsterdam. You would have the Francophones who would be going to Paris. And you would have the Anglophones who would be going to London. And you would have the Lusophones who would be going to Portugal. So I go and I take a look at what those communities look like and how they exist within those host cultures.
Any trips to Asia?
Not yet, but I definitely want to get to Asia.
Tell us what this image is.
This is a traditional boat that's made out of papyrus, and these are fishermen on Lake Tana. And that's a lake that empties into the Blue Nile, which begins the Nile River down to the Mediterranean. And these boats you find in some of the drawings on the ancient Egyptian tombs. And it's just an incredible thing to see. Here is the Baobab tree in the desert in Senegal. The locals say that this tree grows upside down because it looks like the roots are in the air. It has so few leaves. This is the Blue Nile Falls, which the Ethiopians call Tisisat.
Is that falls as high as it looks to me?
It's very high and it's very wide, and it pours out of Lake Tana and it's heading down to Sudan, where it joins in Khartoum with the White Nile out of Lake Victoria and continues all the way down to Egypt and the Mediterranean. In fact, 85% of the water of the Nile that gets into Egypt comes out of this Blue Nile.
What do you learn about the African diaspora doing this year after year after year since the 1970s that really has changed over time? Anything you can put into words?
Well, first of all, I traveled to the African diaspora because I'm in search of finding out what are the many different missing pieces of myself and what they look like. And those things, the first time is always a discovery. The second time is based upon something that may happen on the first trip that makes me want to dig deeper. In the process, I see the change that I think that makes me feel more comfortable as a person, fills out those missing parts in my psyche. But I'm also looking at what the reality of the people are. And I see changes as well as stress. I've seen change for modernization. You know, Africa, up until the Chinese involvement, you know, Africa, the Westerners sort of looked at Africa as a wastebasket and consumers. And the Chinese had a different attitude of looking at Africa as a place to industrialize. So that industrialization and that money to industrialize the country has caused a great deal of change.
What we haven't seen, at least in the images that you brought for today, were cities. We saw a lot of countryside shots.
Well, there's a reason for that. And I have to admit, this could be my own shortcoming, but I'm a country boy. I come from a small town in Alabama of 800 people. And I just feel more comfortable. I've always felt more comfortable with small town village people. When I would go to Africa in the 70s, I would sometimes go on charter flights, and all the other Americans would go stay in the cities. And I would just do the opposite. I would strike out by myself and just go from village to village and try to make friends and live with people. And I just found that not only was I more comfortable, but I think that my experiences were more authentic, because I was able to immerse myself within families and within smaller groups, and to become a friend who happened to have a camera.
Well, once again, the exhibit called My Soul Flies Home to Africa, Images from an Ongoing Journey, is by Chester Higgins, and it is up at Tekserve on West 23rd Street through June 13th. Also on Wednesday, May 9th, he will present a slideshow and talk about the sacred rituals and religious ceremonies that he's photographed in Africa. Do you know the time of your presentation on the 9th?
6:30.
All right, 6:30 p.m. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that's it for this week's show. We roll out a new episode Wednesday nights at 7:30, or see us anytime at CUNY.TV. Next week, the Webby Awards, the best of the internet. And check out my daily radio show, weekday mornings at 10 on WNYC. Tomorrow morning, what to think about the Khalid Sheikh Mohammed Military Tribunal at Guantanamo Bay. That's on 93.9 FM and AM 820 WNYC. Hope to talk to you then.